Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, October the 17th, 2025. Today there is a square between the Sun and Jupiter. This aspect could be of some importance, and in this video I'm going to consider what it might mean, and I will be looking at a couple of people, famous people, who might be impacted by it. But before I look at this Sun-Jupiter square, I want to turn to the astrology and I Ching of today, for today. So here is the chart for October the 17th, set for noon, New York time. There is in the thumbnail, there's a sun and there's Jupiter, just to remind us that there is a Sun square Jupiter in the sky at the moment. And don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So turning to this chart, the moon is in Virgo at noon, New York time. Moon is at 11 degrees Virgo. So the moon is obviously in an earth sign. It's the only planet in an earth sign. And I've been thinking quite a lot recently about, what does it mean when you've got a singleton planet in an earth sign, particularly if it's the sun or the moon. And, with this moon, it certainly indicates that there might be a concern about the material world and what forms the material world and how it is structured. But maybe because the moon is on its own, being the only planet in an earth sign, it could be the case that the concern about detail may be ever so slightly obsessive. Perhaps because there's no support. That is, one way of looking at it. And also, the moon is starting to make a conjunction to the south node. So it's certainly in the same sign as the south node. And so, over the course of the day, there might be, indeed, a certain obsession about detail, which might be a bit unnecessary. And there could, in fact, be an obsessiveness, about the day in general. The moon... it doesn't actually make any aspects. Not any direct. Well, okay, it does make you. Okay, late in the day in the US, in the Americas, the moon will be making a sextile to Mercury and Mars. So it's not true to say it's not making any aspects. I was kind of looking at that from a sort of GMT perspective. So the moon, eventually makes that sextile to Mercury. And perhaps Mars, really right at the end of the day, but you'd have to be in the Americas, for that. And aside from the moon, we have a square between the Sun and Jupiter. So we got Sun in Libra, square Jupiter in Cancer. This aspect could potentially be obsessive, because when we think about Jupiter, we might also be thinking about exaggeration. And so that might link with the moon in Virgo, because I think that with moon in Virgo, there could be a concern about details which, might be exaggerated by the Sun-Jupiter aspect. Sun-Jupiter, also about exaggeration, maybe taking things too far. But I will be looking at the Sun-Jupiter aspect, in detail at the end of the video. And of course, each of the 12 signs will feel the Sun-Jupiter contact in different ways. Now, aside from Sun square Jupiter, we do have Mercury sesquiquadrate Neptune. So Mercury is now pretty close to the sesquiquadrate, not just of Neptune, but of the Aries point. So when you think about Mercury sesquiquadrate Neptune, it could be about deception, and it might be about deceiving ourselves. We think we know the facts, we think we understand what's going on, but is this necessarily the case? And also we have to be careful when listening to other people. What are people saying? What kind of impressions are people giving? And some people might be lying. Maybe they're being economical with the truth, but it might not be deliberate. It's going to be perhaps difficult to be straightforward with this Mercury sesquiquadrate Neptune. But there's a positive side to Mercury sesquiquadrate Neptune. It can be quite sensitive. It could be sort of spiritual, or at least very psychological. Mercury sesquiquadrate Neptune is interested in what people are feeling, and perhaps is prepared to go sort of deeply into things, and not just be satisfied with surface appearances. That is Mercury in Scorpio. Then we have got a biquintile between the Sun and Uranus. So we've got Sun square Jupiter, and we've got Sun biquintile Uranus. So those two aspects might work in quite similar ways. I mean, when you think about Sun biquintile Uranus, it's the effects we're trying to create, and what are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? And Sun biquintile Uranus could be about the desire to stand out, to be perhaps someone special, and to really make an impact. And some of us might regard it as being very important to be dramatic, but it might be something that has to be planned. So if we want to have a big and constructive effect, we have to think about it. How are we going to do it? What is the best approach? Now, another thing that occurs to me about this chart, at least what's going on today. I've said that the Moon in Virgo, is the only planet in an Earth sign. Additionally, we only have Neptune in a fire sign, so we have not much Earth and not much fire. So what does that mean? When we think about Earth and fire, we could be thinking about Jungian psychology, and I think that Jung says that Earth and fire, they are the sort of irrational axis, whereas air and water are on the rational axis. And irrational, of course, that means something different. It doesn't mean crazy necessarily, but Earth and fire. With Earth and fire, things are obvious. That's how it should be. You completely get it. You perceive, and you make all the connections. You might make the connections because of your intuition, or you might make the connection through what you can see, what's right in front of you. And because of that lack of irrationality, that might mean that it's very difficult to make connections at the moment. Things don't necessarily make sense. I'm talking about those fast connections. So if we want to understand what's going on, we have to use air and water. Now, air and water are two very different elements, but they still have, in their own way, a way of either thinking or feeling things through, and it takes time. So if you want to work out what's going on, you can't necessarily at the moment make an instant decision. It's not going to be immediately obvious. You have to sit on it, think about it, allow your feelings to settle and really understand it. So it's very important not to rush to judgment, right now. So that's the picture if we set the chart for New York. If we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, then the Moon is at 3 degrees Virgo at noon. So perhaps very, very early in the day, probably before dawn. The Moon is going to be in late Leo, but for most of the day, the moon will be in Virgo. And if you are in Australasia, you might be picking up to some extent on the Moon square Uranus. So I talked about the Moon square Uranus yesterday, but if you're in the Americas, that's not really a feature of today, Friday. But if you are in Australasia, there might be a Moon Uranus feel to the day, especially at the beginning, and so there could be perhaps excitement or a reaction or even an overreaction. And moon square Uranus, even though it's in mutable signs, can be quite stubborn. Uranus is a stubborn planet, and it likes to do things, its way, and it does want to be different. But I don't want to exaggerate the differences between Australia, New Zealand, and the rest of the world. I think that there is a broad similarity. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. So here is a chart. And so what do we see? We see a Mars sextile Pluto. So Mars and Pluto are slowly sort of moving into aspect. They're now sort of 50 arc minutes apart. So over the weekend, that Mars sextile Pluto is going to be exact. As far as what it means, well, it could just be about people trying to get their way. It might be as simple as that. Maybe we can get our way if we feel that it's important, and the Mars sextile Pluto can help. Additionally, we have got the Earth conjunct Chiron. So geocentrically, just to remind you what we're looking at, geocentrically, this was perhaps an aspect I should have mentioned and didn't mention. We've got Sun opposition Chiron. So, sorry, that was an aspect I missed. And so when you've got a geocentric opposition involving the Sun, it heliocentrically becomes an Earth-Chiron conjunction. So there is the Earth-Chiron conjunction. So the Chiron principle could be quite strong today, and it might be about what might it be about? It could be about us feeling sorry for ourselves, feeling that we haven't been given everything we need, or perhaps there's been some damage in the past if we go down the wounded healer road. Alternatively, Chiron, Earth conjunct Chiron, might be the desire to be different. We're not entirely satisfied, with the way things are, and it perhaps links also with the Sun biquintile Uranus. So Sun biquintile Uranus is the effort to stand out, and likewise Earth conjunct Chiron heliocentrically. We know, or we feel, that we've got something new to contribute, and we don't want to just follow what everyone else is doing. And this might be an opportunity to tell the world that we are different, that people shouldn't make assumptions about us. They might have just assumed that we're just going to just do what everyone else does, we're not going to rock the boat. But no, that's not how we see it. So maybe for some of us it is a time to show real individuality. But what if someone else is showing their individuality? Well, you've got to give people a chance, and also try to work out why people are behaving or at least some people are behaving in the way they are. And it might just be compensation. If we have felt that we're not being taken seriously, then at some stage we might have to do something different. Okay, it might be us doing something different. It may be someone else feeling that they really do have to assert their individuality. So those are a few thoughts about what is happening today astrologically. So I'm now going to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, October the 17th, 2025. Aries. The Sun is making an opposition to Chiron, and maybe this opposition between the Sun and Chiron, is important. And one way of looking at this opposition could be to think about, what does it mean for Chiron to be in Aries? Chiron stays in Aries for some time, I think for a couple of years. And while Chiron is moving through Aries, you perhaps feel that you do need to do things, differently. Perhaps it's a response to what has happened in the past, or at times you feel you haven't been, taken seriously enough, and you just have to show the world that you really are different, that you really are an individual. But with Sun opposition Chiron, maybe you can see, all the reasons why you can't assert yourself, why you can't be yourself. And that, that Sun in Libra might be about other people, having to worry about other people. You don't want to upset anyone. And it's good that you're thinking about others, but you also have to think about yourself. And Sun opposition Chiron, across the main axis of your solar chart, might indicate that the pressure is becoming quite strong, and you feel that you have to do something different, that you have to confound other people's expectations. So this is a particular issue if you feel that there is a lot of expectation around you. And in fact, there is a T-square involving Jupiter. So it's not just the fact that you've got Sun opposition Chiron. There is Jupiter on the T, Jupiter in Cancer. So we've got Sun exactly square Jupiter today, and so the Sun is moving towards the opposition to Chiron. I probably should have made more of this T-square in the introduction, but the way you perhaps need to see this T-square is that, Jupiter in Cancer is the answer. That is a way of looking at a T-square, looking at the planet on a T. And so it may be the case, Aries, that the best expression of your individuality at the moment is not to seek massive amounts of attention, not to do something in the public eye, but instead to perhaps retreat, to go back to what is important to you, go back to what is fundamental, and that is Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter in Cancer, can represent your past. I know that we always want to move forward, but the past does matter, and it does matter that you consider your past, and perhaps you use the past as your guide and also as your security. I mean, that is obvious. So don't feel that you have to be out there in the world making things happen, perhaps being disruptive. It seems the obvious thing to do is to be disruptive because everyone pays attention to you, but maybe you should do the opposite, and by retreating to some extent onto your own territory, that might be the best way of looking after yourself and your needs, and most importantly, expressing your individuality. And this is happening at the same time as the moon is moving through Virgo. So when you have moon moving through Virgo, it can be a time, Aries, where you feel that you do to some extent need to get yourself together. You don't have to progress through dramatic steps. Sometimes the best way of progressing is to plan, is to think about the future, think about what you need to do in the future. And being an Aries, you have a fairly clear idea about the way it should be going, and you can see what's wrong, and that means that the moon in Virgo can really work in your favor, provided you don't take it too far. And the moon is making a conjunction to the south node, and with the moon making a conjunction to the south node, it's very important that you don't get sidetracked by irrelevant detail. Now, that is not something that Aries normally has a problem with, but it could be a problem at the moment. So if you are worrying about something, working on something, ask yourself, is it relevant? Or are you just doing something because you just want to be doing something for the sake of it? And that would not be desirable. What do they call it? Do they call that busy work? I think they call it busy work in schools, just being teacher telling the children just to do something, just to fill up time, to fill in forms. That's not what you want to get involved with. So, Aries, if you are doing a task, or if someone else is tasking you to do something, consider, is it really relevant? Which tasks do matter? Because that that is an important question, because you want to be ready for the future. You want to align yourself with the future, and just by doing something because it's easy or because it's obvious, that is not necessarily the way to go. Taurus. At the moment, Taurus, you can be, I think, fairly creative in your own way. You're able to do something which is satisfying, but without being especially spectacular. And Taurus, you may find yourself doing things because they're easy, because they are a natural part of who you are, and that, in one sense, is a good thing. I mean, you don't want to do something which is alien to yourself, but you have to be careful, Taurus, that you don't get caught up in your sort of line of least resistance. So being the line of least resistance is doing something because you've done it in the past. You're doing something because you know how to do it, and perhaps you're not challenging yourself. And so that might be a danger. Just because you feel satisfied with something doesn't mean that you should pursue it as far as is possible, because you could end up just wasting a lot of time, and you could be missing out on something. You also might be ignoring the social dimension, and the social dimension could matter. You have to think about what other people are saying, what other people are doing, and perhaps they have ideas and suggestions, and if you ignore the social dimension, you could be trapping yourself, trapping yourself in the past, and you're just not progressing. But I'm not saying that is going to happen, and I think that there is the opportunity to benefit from what other people are doing. One aspect that is starting to form is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars. This Mercury-Mars conjunction, it doesn't become exact for a few days, but it's getting there. And so this Mercury-Mars conjunction does say something about what other people are doing and how other people are behaving. And you do need to be aware of what people are thinking and what people are getting ready to do, because if you ignore the social dimension, then something might be developing behind your back. And it could be, for example, that someone is getting annoyed and you don't know they're getting annoyed because you're not looking. But do look, and where possible, Taurus, use your sensitivity. Now, I know that the moon is in Virgo, and the moon is probably going to incline you to look at things on the surface. I mean, that's going to be easiest. You are a Taurus, you are an earth sign. The way things look like, what things look like on the surface can be quite important, and you want to be, you want to be down to earth. You want to be able to touch things, but that might not always be easy. And if you don't use other modes of sensation, I'm particularly thinking about, maybe even the sixth sense, using your maybe your telepathic capacities. We've all got some degree of telepathy, but just listening to the vibes, feeling the vibes, you can then start to get an understanding of what other people are feeling. And it will take time. It's not going to be immediately obvious what is motivating other people, and it requires you to be patient and to soak up the vibes. And as far as relationships are concerned, whatever kind of relationship we're talking about, there is a quest for unity, wanting to get close to someone. You feel that is the right thing to do. That there's a lot of delusion here. When you get close to someone, something gets lost. What gets lost? Well, discernment gets lost. You find it difficult to think for yourself. And so, other people are important, that is true. But you don't want to get too close to them. You want to get the balance absolutely right. Well, I say you don't want to get too close to them. It maybe in certain situations it's okay if you absolutely trust someone, you know what you're dealing with. But if you get too close to someone who you don't know, and then there is a lack of familiarity and the closeness is maybe inappropriate, that could be a problem, and you might give away too much, or you might be deceived. So think very carefully about other people. Really try to understand what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and it's not going to be obvious. It's not going to be completely straightforward. So there is a bit of a note of caution on that, and getting the balance right between discernment and understanding may be hard. Now, one aspect we do have, the headline aspect of the week, if you like, is a square between the Sun and Jupiter, and this Sun Jupiter square could be quite excessive, and it might encourage you to potentially get involved with the wrong things. Jupiter is in Cancer, and with Jupiter in Cancer, that says something about the way your brain is working, perhaps the way you're communicating, and you can communicate very well in general. But with Sun square Jupiter, there could be real confusion, because you don't quite know what to. You're not quite sure what to focus on, and you always sort of see more. And you see more, and when you see more, you try to align yourself or realign yourself, and you put a lot of energy into trying to get it right. And the more energy you put into it, the more difficult it becomes. And if you keep trying, the worse it gets. So maybe it's a situation where if you're trying to do something, maybe it's the first take that matters. Get it right the first time, because if you don't get it right the first time, then by the 20th time it might be driving you crazy. So don't beat yourself up about things, and try not to be too much of a perfectionist. Gemini. Mercury is your ruler, so we do have to track what Mercury is doing. And at the moment, Mercury is in the middle of Scorpio. It's at 15 degrees 43 minutes Scorpio at noon New York time. So that is an important point. It's sesquiquadrate the Aries point, and being sesquiquadrate the Aries point, Mercury is quite sensitive. It's sensitive to what is happening on this planet. And this means, Gemini, that you have the opportunity to really understand things in quite a deep way. You're not going to trivialize things, and that is a good thing. I mean, it's good that you can cut through the trivia and start to understand what is really going on. But it's an understanding that has an emotional and an intellectual dimension, and so you kind of have to balance the emotional and the intellectual. Both are important, and if you can get both right, then you're going to be in the right place, and you're going to you will sort of understand what is happening. Though Mercury is making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune. Neptune is getting really close to the Aries point. Neptune is now at 0 degrees 7 Pisces retrograde, getting ready to move. Neptune's at 0 degrees 7 Aries, getting ready to go back into Pisces, and so Mercury making the sesquiquadrate to Neptune. On one hand, this does intensify your sensitivity. Use your feelings. I know Gemini is not known for being super sensitive, for being super emotional, but I think you are more emotional than usual at the moment. And you really do understand what's happening, but you should not be rushing to judgment. It is absolutely not a day for making decisions or for feeling, oh, it's all clear. Having those magic moments where the clouds suddenly vanish and you see the answer, it's staring you in the face. It's not that kind of day. If you're looking for solutions, solutions are going to take a long time to develop. So don't feel you're going to get instant clarity. I know we all want instant clarity. It just makes things so much more easy, but it's not going to happen. And to understand things, it could take days. You know, you'd love to find shortcuts, but I don't think there are any shortcuts, Gemini. So stay with your feelings. And if you feel something strongly, then keep feeling. By that I mean a strong feeling can be deceptive. It might seem very real, but it's not something that you can rely on. You're dealing, in terms of your feelings, with something that you're not necessarily completely good at. I mean, yeah, sure, you're as emotional as anyone, but your emotions perhaps, don't have the depth, maybe, of let's say, a Cancerian or a Scorpio. And so give your emotions extra time to work. And, don't forget your own sort of intellect. And so intellect and emotions kind of need to work together. And, then in time you can work out what is right. And it is a rational process. We are dealing with the rational axis. In Jungian psychology, I believe that is the air, and that's sort of air and water, feeling and the intellect. And the rationality means working things out in your own way. It's not about what's happening in the external world. It's not necessarily about collecting loads of data. That's not what it's about. It's about you, in your own way, deciding and realizing what is true and what is right. And it is a slow process, Gemini, but you will get there in the end. If you are patient. Another aspect we've got. The Mercury sesquiquadrate Neptune, I think, is a major aspect. But another aspect we've got is Sun square Jupiter. And this Sun square Jupiter, it could say something about money. I mean, Jupiter is in Cancer. So, Jupiter's been in Cancer for quite some time. And Cancer is a sign in the Gemini chart which is often connected with money. And so with Sun square Jupiter, there might be some danger that you are inclined to spend too much money. I mean, that is one way of looking at it. But, Sun square Jupiter can work in two ways. It could be that you want to make a saving which is unnecessary. So the question is, what is the saving? If the saving is a nominal amount, it might not be a real saving. You don't want to save money just for the sake of it, but in the same way, you don't want to spend money just for the sake of it. You want to be reasonable. And, the Sun square Jupiter as an aspect very often is not reasonable. It wants to take things too far. It gets caught on details which really you shouldn't be worrying about. You need to think about what is right. And again, working out what is right takes time, and you don't want to make a fast financial decision based on some short-term perception which you haven't really thought through. And that could be the case with making purchases. If you're trying to make a purchase, or if you're trying to make a choice, should you buy this, should you buy that? This is particularly important if you're buying something which is expensive, or relatively expensive as far as your own finances are concerned. You want to resolve the matter, but it's going to take time to resolve the matter. It might take days to resolve the matter. So don't think that you can resolve the matter today. One final point is that Mercury is starting to make a conjunction to Mars. Now, this conjunction between Mercury and Mars, it becomes exact on, I think it becomes exact, I think on Monday. So it's not quite there yet. I think it's on the 20th, but it becomes exact. But I think you might be starting to pick up on it. And Mercury, Mars can be just plain anger, something that is increasingly starting to annoy you. Something is not right. Something is, perhaps being badly organized. It may be something badly organized, in your own life. Of course, I've got my sun in Gemini. I think I can relate to that myself. But it is intensifying, and so with this Mercury-Mars conjunction, don't just get annoyed about something just for the sake of it. Ask yourself, what can you do about it? What can you put right? And it might just seem a really difficult task, but maybe over the next few days, you need to consider working off some of this anger. Mercury conjunct Mars. It may not be anger. It just might be just sort of mental tension, and you can perhaps work it all off by maybe creating order. And that's perhaps what the Mercury-Mars conjunction is asking you to do. But don't worry, I will be returning to the theme of this conjunction, because over the next few days, over the weekend, it may become increasingly powerful. Cancer. Right now, you are able to move around with a certain amount of facility. It's easy, Cancer, to move from one place to another if you want. If you want variety, if you feel that variety really matters to you, and you can, I think, drift from one situation into another, one scene to another. You understand, what details matter, what to look out for, but you don't want to get too focused on particular sets of detail. The detail are just part of it, and it might be, Cancer, that you get kind of caught, because we've got the moon in Virgo, and the moon in Virgo is conjunct the south node. Now, normally moon in Virgo is fine. There's nothing wrong with the moon in Virgo, but the moon in Virgo does have some downsides, particularly when it's getting close to the south node, perhaps particularly when it's the only planet in an earth sign. If there were other planets in an earth sign, in earth signs, maybe it wouldn't be such a problem. But with this moon conjunct moon conjunct the south node in Virgo, there could be an obsessive quality to this, and you might just be spending just too much time on certain details which really are quite unimportant. They don't matter, but you might decide they do matter, and spend huge amounts of time worrying about something that you absolutely should not be worrying about. It's trivial, and somehow you have to look at things from a broader perspective, and that might be the challenge. If we use larger orbs, we could say that what we have at the moment is moon conjunct the south node and Saturn conjunct the north node, and the way you should be moving, the place you should be going, is towards that Saturn conjunct the south node. And the Saturn conjunct the south node is perhaps suggesting that you have the sort of the discipline to look at things from a broader perspective and not get sidetracked. And you might be helped by another person. Saturn could represent a person who is able to rise above things, but also someone who is, quite sensible, who is quite grounded. Remember, Saturn is in mutual reception to Venus, and so it could be Cancer that if you are completely at sea, that you really don't know what to focus on, that you can get help from another person. So Cancer, don't think that you have to do everything on your own, but still you're so tempted to get sidetracked, on things that really aren't worth the effort. Then we do have the Sun making a square to Jupiter, and this aspect is also perhaps about being sidetracked. Jupiter is in Cancer. It's slowing down in Cancer. I think Jupiter is it's soon enough going to go retrograde, but it's going to stay in Cancer. It stays in Cancer until the summer. But this Sun square Jupiter, we've got the Sun. The Sun is in its detriment in Libra. The Sun is not necessarily a fortunate planet in Libra. Jupiter, by contrast, is in Cancer. And that very much is you. That's where you should be going. That's about your sense of who you are, the way you can sort of expand forward. It's a very positive energy. The Sun in Libra could just be a distraction, and you might be dragged down. Dragged down again by you just worrying about the wrong things, or it could be that you're inclined to sort of look down. You don't really want to look at the road ahead. You want to look at the road that the road that you're standing on, and you just look at the gravel, and you're not looking at the horizon, and that might seem to be more comfortable, but it's not going to mean any progress. There could be no progress because of that Sun square Jupiter, and it all links with this danger, Cancer, that you just concentrate on the wrong things, and that could really spoil the day. So Cancer, you've got to think about the broader picture. You've got to think about the road ahead, not the past, and not the details of the past. Or you can't do something because you've got to worry about something else, something really trivial. And if you worry about something trivial, you miss the big picture. Leo, the Sun is square Jupiter, and the Sun is your ruler. And I therefore think that this aspect between the Sun and Jupiter could have an influence on you. So what this might mean is that you get rather sidetracked by your own feelings, your inner feelings, things that perhaps are quite deep, that are not entirely conscious. And this needn't be such a bad thing. Jupiter is in Cancer. Jupiter is a planet of growth, and expansion. And so, when Jupiter is in Cancer, Leo, there's a lot happening at an unconscious level, and you perhaps can allow your unconscious to inform you, and that can then have an impact on what you do, what you say, how you communicate. And sometimes, Leo, it just might be difficult to say what you mean. I mean, the issue might be that words are not enough. You have a feeling, or perhaps you remember a dream. Yeah, dreams. I had dreams last night. I had dreams about horror films last night. It was sort of Exorcist kind of film, kind of dreams. Just little pictures of houses which I knew were about to be haunted in a quite a nasty, demonic kind of way. And I was looking at this house, and I was looking at the brambles around the house. It was in a sort of a suburban neighborhood, and it was all very nice. It was all sort of sunny, but something very bad was about to happen. And I was kind of also aware that people were making a film here kind of, and I could see the inspirations of a film, but I was just very aware of the brambles and the Himalayan blackberries. I think that's what they are technically, but it's very difficult to grasp a dream, isn't it? You get sort of images. I mean, you know something bad is happening, is about to happen, but you can't really say anything. I'm not saying anything bad is happening. I'm just rambling, but I'm just saying that you might have unconscious impressions which could be useful, but it could be very difficult to communicate them, and perhaps you shouldn't try. I mean, that is the problem about talking about one's dreams, as perhaps I've just shown you. You say something that is really quite disconnected, but you know emotionally that there is something going on there, even if you can't fully express it. And so that might be how the Sun-Jupiter square works. You're being very, very concerned to say something, but the words don't necessarily come out. And when you do try to speak, the more you try to speak, the more confusing it becomes. So perhaps you should just keep it simple and not feel that there is anything that you have to say, and try to be as natural as possible. In fact, if you are as natural as possible, then I think that things should work for you. And you can see this in the chart. Here's the sun. Sun is your ruler, remember, and the sun is in Libra, and it's on the Mercury-Venus midpoint. So it's exactly conjunct. You can see it by eye. Sun, there's Mercury, there's Venus. The Sun is halfway between Mercury and Venus. So with the Sun on the Mercury-Venus midpoint, that does indicate that you are able to speak freely. And I think it's just important that you don't try too hard to get it right. You don't try too hard to explain, particularly if you're explaining things which might seem impossible, like your dreams, like your distant feelings. They're important, but it's just not right. It's not really the right time to discuss them. And so perhaps you should just keep it simple and try to talk about what you absolutely know to be right. For example, you can talk about what you're good at, what you've been doing recently, what you've been creating, what you've been building, because there's no room for confusion there if you just keep it simple. And that really should be enough. So Leo, there is a communication angle today. And I think there is a wrong way to communicate, and there's a right way. And I think the right way to communicate is to concentrate on what is available to you. There may be other things going on which are not available to you. They come from your unconscious. They can't be described. At least they can't be described to another person. You can think about them yourself. I mean, I think at the moment you are very sort of sensitive, and the connection between you and your unconscious is quite clear in a way. It is quite open, but it is still very much a work in progress. So perhaps concentrate on the sort of a hidden side, but in a hidden way. Some things just shouldn't be revealed, at least not yet. Virgo, the moon is moving through your sign now. Doesn't matter where you are, what your time zone is. The moon is in Virgo, And with the moon in Virgo, you perhaps feel that you are more in control. And the moon is making a square aspect to Uranus. Now, this square aspect between the moon and Uranus, you would have felt it yesterday in the Americas. You would have felt it today if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But still, there is a square relationship between the moon and Uranus, wherever you are. Because Uranus is in Gemini, the moon is in Virgo. And so with this moon-Uranus aspect, you are able to, I think, be yourself. And you can be original, in your own way. Originality does matter. And you can, not just be original for the sake of it, because originality, without any grounding, it doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, it's not enough just to be different. But you can be original in quite a grounded way, because the moon is in Virgo. The moon is the moon is in an earth sign, and so perhaps you can think about ways in which you can really bring down to earth your originality and make it real. But in the process, it's very important that you don't try too hard to get it right, because the moon is making a conjunction to the South Node, and one of the problems about the moon conjunct the South Node is, if it's in Virgo, it's saying that aspects of the Virgo principle are not necessarily helpful. So if we think about Virgo in a textbook way, sort of stereotype Virgo, and what is the disadvantage of the sign Virgo? Well, what people say is, Virgo can be obsessed with detail, can just be looking at the minutiae of things and not seeing the big picture. And with the moon conjunct the South Node, that might be the case. So Virgo, do consider what is important and don't personalize everything. So something which might not be entirely perfect may be something that you do personalize, and I don't think that is at all desirable. And instead you need to be thinking about the broader picture, and also thinking about other people, because we've got the moon conjunct the South Node, and we've also got Saturn conjunct the North Node. I mean, Saturn and the North Node are quite a way away, but with the moon conjunct the South Node, it is emphasized, and the moon is, of course, running up to an opposition to Saturn. Now, that opposition between the moon and Saturn is not going to happen until the weekend, but it still is starting to form. And so it is about you and others, the other. And you have to consider the other. It's not just about your agenda, what is important to you. It is important right now that you consider what other people are doing and what other people's impact might be. And it's probably important that you don't try to completely go it alone. If you do try to go it alone, you could make mistakes. If you're trying, for example, to make decisions, and you think you can make decisions, all by yourself, then you might not do a particularly good job. And so perhaps you have to challenge yourself and get an alternative view. And the alternative view might make things more complicated because you have to consider something else. But sometimes that really is important. Though you don't want to take relationships at the moment too far. I mean, you can deal with people on a sort of a mental level and a sort of a material level. But on an emotional level, I think there could be limits. Right now, you might find it difficult to get really close to someone because that's not really what you want, and you could get confused, and when there are moments of confusion, you might respond by being really defensive. So if you don't understand, you don't want to involve yourself with it. So get close to people to some extent, but don't get too close. And one aspect we do have today, which could really create complications, is a sesquiquadrate between Mercury and Neptune. And Mercury and Neptune, does mean that it's easy for you to get confused. You might think you know things, and in many respects you do know things. You think you've got it clear, but then something happens and it just becomes completely chaotic again. And perhaps you shouldn't be too concerned about clarity. It's going to be really difficult to find clarity. It's going to be difficult to find real 100% answers that you can rely on. And instead, you should regard it as a sort of an ongoing quest, the ongoing quest to understand what's going on. And it's not always going to be easy. And it might also make you annoyed, because one aspect that is starting to form is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars. So Mercury is now, it's less than 2 degrees away from the conjunction of Mars. I think the conjunction becomes exact on Monday. And this Mercury-Mars conjunction could make you annoyed. And I think the reason you might be annoyed is because you just don't get things. You don't fully understand them, and you want to understand them right now. And you're annoyed perhaps with yourself, perhaps with other people, that things aren't clear, and this could be an issue, over the next few days. So if things are difficult, if things don't make immediate sense, don't beat yourself up about it. It's just going to take time. And I think that patience, allowing solutions to emerge over a longer period of time rather than immediately, might be the right approach. Libra. There is today an aspect between the Sun and Jupiter. The Sun is square Jupiter. And I think that this Sun square Jupiter really does matter. The Sun is in your sign. It is still the Libra season. It's not going to last forever. The Sun is in 24 degrees 32 Libra, so in 6 days the Sun will be in Scorpio. But right now it is in your sign, and it is square Jupiter. Jupiter's in Cancer. Jupiter is very strong in Cancer. It's exalted in Cancer. And I think that this Sun-Jupiter square could be quite motivating. It can get you to understand, what is possible. And that you're doing well up to a point, but you also know that you could be doing a lot better. And, the Sun-Jupiter square can be seen as an excessive aspect, about taking something too far. But sometimes it's a good idea to go over the top. And this is especially the case when it comes to your ambitions, whatever it is that you want for yourself. You need to really push it as hard as you can. I know it's a Friday, and of course Friday things might appear to be winding down. It's the end of a week, but that's not how you should see it. There's still stuff you can do. So Libra, really do, make the most of things. And if you've got any spare time, think about what your ambitions are, and don't get sidetracked by concerns about your own weakness. I'm not saying you are weak, but you might feel that you just don't have sufficient strength to see something through. Well, if you don't have sufficient strength to see something through, extra strength is available. And the more you try to push yourself, the more available this extra strength will come. And so this could be this with the Sun square Jupiter, the excessiveness of Sun square Jupiter, the supposed excessiveness, can be channeled, and you can use that energy to get real results. And it's important, Libra, that you are self-contained to an extent, because if you are heavily involved with other people, it certainly could make things complicated. The Sun in Libra is making an opposition to Chiron, across the main axis of your chart. And so Sun opposition Chiron, well, you could be influenced by other people and other people's problems, other people's wounds, other people's worries, also other people's extravagance. Extravagance because the Sun is square Jupiter, but also extravagance in terms of them wanting to make a big impression, wanting to do something different, and that could sidetrack you. So you can have big ambitions, but if another person is being overly dramatic, that might get in your way. So I'm not sure if this Sun-Chiron opposition is necessarily going to be useful. It could encourage you to take things too far. But if we try to be positive about Sun opposition Chiron, it could be that you are inspired by another person's originality. And this inspiration can feed into your own ambitions and your own ideas about the future. So whatever other people's intentions are, their behavior can have an important impact on you, because you see something for the first time, and you understand what is possible and what you need to do. So Libra, I think today there's a lot to sidetrack you, there's a lot that could distract you, but some of these distractions might be useful. They might just complete the picture and give you a better understanding of what you need to do. So if you make the most of the day's energies, I think it can be a pretty good day, and it can be sort of a pretty good ending perhaps to the working week, although you've got the weekend to consider, and this Sun square Jupiter is not just a one-day wonder. It's been building up for a couple of days, and over the weekend the Sun will still be square Jupiter, and so this is perhaps an opportunity to think about your potential, and perhaps get ready also for the new moon, because we have got a new moon coming up. This new moon, let me just tell you about the new moon very quickly. So this new moon is on Tuesday. It's at 28 degrees Libra. So it's a new moon in Libra. This new moon will be kind of square Jupiter, and so this new moon may give you an opportunity to really refocus yourself and sort of dedicate yourself to the future, and making sure that your ambitions are fulfilled in the future. And so new moon square Jupiter it's going to be a time where you really can make things happen, but the more prepared you are, the better, and perhaps that's what the next few days are all about. Scorpio. There are planets, of course, in Scorpio. Indeed, the Sun is going to be in Scorpio in less than a week. But those Scorpio planets are Mercury and Mars, and Mercury and Mars are starting to form a conjunction. This conjunction is less than 2 degrees apart, and so I would guess, Scorpio, that you're feeling perhaps the irritation of Mercury conjunct Mars. Mercury conjunct Mars can be irritated. Mercury is about the way we think, what we're trying to think about. It can also be about the way we communicate, and if it's conjunct Mars, there are things to aggravate you, and you're going to be quite good at expressing your aggravation. And so the question is this Mercury-Mars conjunction going to be a good or a bad thing? I think it can be a good thing, because it really does allow you to express the power of your personality. Sometimes Scorpios do find it difficult to say what they feel. They keep things back. But I don't think today today that needs to be a problem. I think that you can be very clear about what you think, and it's not just today. It's over the next few days. This Mercury conjunct Mars, I think, is exact on Monday. So don't hold back, and it just may be your opportunity to tell people what you think, and to potentially express your annoyance. And I think you can get away with it because Mars is in Scorpio. Mars is in its own sign, and additionally, with Mercury conjunct Mars, there are new things that you're thinking about. Your brain is very active right now, and part of that activity might be annoyance, but another part might be something more constructive. New ideas, thinking about new things, thinking about what is possible, and being ready to act on them, and perhaps being a little bit impatient. And it's probably a good idea to be impatient. Now, as far as other things are concerned, we do have a conjunction between the Moon and the South Node, today and tomorrow in Virgo. And with this conjunction, you don't want to worry too much about what other people are doing. The flow should ideally be one way. It's about you expressing who you are, what you want, what you think. It's not so much about worrying about what other people are doing, worrying about other people's opinions. I just somehow don't think that that's going to be especially helpful. So maybe, as far as possible, Scorpio, you should be the one in control, making the decisions, rather than you being at the other end of things. I just don't think you'd feel comfortable about that. And further, I don't think it's the right thing to do. There is a time, Scorpio, when you do need to take into account other people's views and compromise, but not now, Scorpio. I really don't think that is the right approach. And I think that this is also going to be reflected by any attempts you make to get on with people. I don't think you'll get very far. It's nice to be on the same wavelength, but I don't think you're going to be able to find that wavelength. There's always going to be something in the way, blocking you from getting close to another person. And what is blocking you? Well, I think what might be blocking you is you. The fact that you regard yourself as being important, and you should regard yourself as important, because you are, and it's your agenda that matters. And it's not like you're being obnoxious or anything. That there's an ebb and flow. There are times when you can listen, but now is not a time for listening. Now is a time for perhaps talking and for doing your own thing, and not being willing to give anything up, because at some level you have got it right, and because you've got it right, you need to be able to see it through. Sagittarius, there are things that you want to achieve, and you might be in something of a hurry. You might feel that now is the time. You want to get it all done, and it's good that you're being so persistent, but you need to perhaps be aware of some of your limitations. If you are desperate to finish something off by a particular time or a particular date, then the end results might not be particularly fortunate. And one reason for this is that everything does take time, and it takes time to work out what is happening, and you have to also consider what's going on in the world. The world is in a state of flux, and if you try to stop this flux at one particular time point, you think, well, this is it. I'm going to deal with the world as it is right now. You could do that. But if you were to do that, then you would become increasingly out of date. And that is a danger. Now, as a Sagittarius, you're not someone who is normally out of date. You're very with it. But your normal ability to make connections, to understand where things are going, which again you're very good at usually, it's just not as good as it usually is. And because of that, because of perhaps your bluntness, I mean, when I say bluntness, I don't mean blunt as in being tactless. I mean blunt as in not having the edge. And so I'm sorry, I mean, it would be great if you had the edge, but I just don't think you have that edge right now, that cutting edge. And it's not a problem. You can't have a cutting edge all the time. You can't be intuitive all the time. You can't predict the future all the time. Sometimes you have to accept that you just don't know, and that you're still in a process of understanding. And so, Sagittarius, if you can recognize that and resist the pressure to make decisions, you're going to be fine. That pressure will exist. It could even be that other people expect you to know what's going on. And it's a situation where you just have to say, you don't get it, you don't understand yet. I mean, you're starting to understand, but it just does take time. And it's just so easy at the moment to get confused. There is right now a square aspect between the Sun and Jupiter. Now, I'll be talking a lot more about this Sun square Jupiter later in the video, but this Sun square Jupiter, does affect your ruler, Jupiter. Jupiter's the ruler of Sagittarius. The Sun is square Jupiter, and because of this Sun square Jupiter, you could get distracted. You could be encouraged to go somewhere that is just a blind alley. Or you might see something that's, it seems appealing, it seems glamorous, it seems interesting. But if you start to give it your time, give it your energy, then soon enough you'll realize that you've gone in the wrong direction. So this does mean, Sagittarius, that you have to be very grounded today, and possibly you shouldn't be trying to do anything. You shouldn't be trying to make any real progress. I mean, if you see an opportunity for progress, of course, take that opportunity. But you really need to just live in the here and now and understand that you haven't got all the answers, and because you haven't got all the answers, you're not in a position to make decisions. You're not in a position to take sort of huge initiatives, and that is how you should be approaching today. And I'm really sorry. I would love to be more optimistic and more encouraging. Well, in fact, it's not going to be a bad day. I mean, it needn't be a bad day. It'll only be a bad day if you take things too far, or if you try to do something that you're not really ready for. Capricorn, you want progress. You feel that now is the time to sort of move forward, with whatever it is that is important to you. You can't just stay in one place. You can't stay in one place. You've got to think about the future. You've got to align yourself to the future. And there's also your own particular targets to consider. It doesn't matter who you are. You've got your goals, and you want to pursue them, as quickly as possible. But it's not always easy. We have today a T-square, really. We've got the Sun in Libra, opposition Chiron. We've got Jupiter on the T. In other words, the Sun is square Jupiter. Chiron is pretty close to a square with Jupiter as well. So that's for T square. And so in spite of your desire to move forward, there could be things holding you up. At least they may appear to be holding you up. For example, there's always the past to consider, isn't there? I mean, that might be Sun opposition Chiron. You could argue that, with Chiron in Aries, in a very low profile sort of sector of your chart, but an important sector. Okay, it's low profile in the sense that it's not immediately consciously available always. It's still there. It still has a presence, and Chiron might represent things that had gone wrong in the past. If one's literal about it, it could be wounds from the past. Perhaps something hadn't worked in the past, and you're maybe afraid that it's going to manifest again. You might be worried that, for example, you might see history repeating itself, and that could be a real concern for you. And so, when you're contemplating the future, when you're contemplating, the way you want to move forward, you perhaps have doubts. Maybe it will go wrong in the past. Maybe you'll fall into the same traps. Maybe you haven't progressed, as far as you would have liked. And the Sun is also making a square to Jupiter, and there is a sort of different set of concerns. With Sun square Jupiter, you may be concerned about what are other people thinking, what are other people saying. You can't do everything on your own. You've got to take into account other views, and not just other views, but other lives, other personalities, other priorities. And as a result of this T square, there's some danger that everything comes to a standstill. You just feel that you can't see it through. And I don't think that this need be the case. And when you're talking about a T square, you're looking at a planet on the T. So Sun opposition Chiron, but Jupiter is on the T. It makes the T, and very often that planet on the T is the solution. So it might be, Capricorn, that you get support and you get encouragement, maybe from the last places you expected. Perhaps, for example, someone who you thought was going to be an obstacle is actually going to be the opposite. And this means, Capricorn, that when contemplating your ambitions, you perhaps need to be more trusting. You shouldn't assume that it's you against the rest of the world, that there is going to be support. And there are people, Capricorn, who I think really believe in you. And because people believe in you, this does give you a certain responsibility. You have a responsibility to do what you can, because it may well be the case that your ambitions at some level are actually other people's ambitions as well. So if you are hesitating and you're concerned that you just don't have enough support, think again. I think you really do. And right now, Capricorn, you have a great ability for getting on with people. You don't have to try too hard. It's just very straightforward. And if you want to talk to someone, make contact with them, it's all going to be very straightforward. So perhaps that is the cure for any doubts you have. If you actually start to recognize how respected you are, also maybe even how popular you are, perhaps this will encourage you to move things to the next stage, to be able to really make the most of your abilities, and also to seize the moment. I think it is important you seize the moment, because there are things that can be done and you really can make headway. Aquarius. It's a day that could in some respects be downbeat. You're not necessarily in the mood for doing much, and perhaps you would prefer to withdraw, and perhaps think about your own private stuff. I don't think you're feeling especially open right now, and that might be the natural approach. What comes easiest to you. However, Aquarius, I don't think that is the right approach. I think that you perhaps need to come down from your pedestal. I mean, you might feel that you are in some way different, separate, and that can encourage you to do nothing. But if you instead really start to think about the world, be down to earth, be realistic, and also to not make things complicated. I mean, that is important. Try to look for simple solutions. Try to focus on Occam's razor. Isn't that what they say? Occam's razor. If you have with Occam's razor, it's a kind of a sort of a philosophical approach. If you've got several possibilities, you should go for the one which is most plausible and most straightforward. Of course, Occam's razor is often used to counter conspiracy theories. There is an encouragement to look at the most complicated and convoluted solution to any problem, rather than the solution which is most obvious and most plausible. So, Aquarius, do try to keep things simple. And I know that, as we've discovered over the last few years, something that seemed to be a conspiracy theory is actually true. But if possible, try to avoid conspiratorial views of the world, because you do want things to be easy. I mean, you can't, though, expect everything to be easy. Sometimes there's going to be opposition, and sometimes you're going to have to speak up for yourself. And there is a conjunction between Mercury and Mars coming up. Now, this Mercury-Mars conjunction is exact. I think it's exact on Monday, after the weekend. But, it's still quite close. It's less than 2 degrees apart, Mercury and Mars. And this Mercury-Mars conjunction might encourage you to really speak your mind. And sometimes you have to be open, because it's through openness that you can break a deadlock. Something is bothering you. It may be bothering other people as well. It may be leading to a standstill. And by just being open, by telling everyone what you think and what you believe, that can cause a lot of change. It can sort of shift things. And so if everyone is just oblivious and they're just doing things in their normal way, and you meanwhile are just getting more and more worked up, you see that something's wrong, and then you're open. You tell everyone what you believe, and you don't mince your words. It might seem to be a dangerous strategy, but I don't think it is. I think that you will be establishing your presence, and I think that you get the respect you deserve. And also with Mercury conjunct Mars, we may be talking about a situation where you shouldn't allow something to build up. So the earlier something is said, the earlier you express your feelings, the easier it's going to be. If you allow things to brew, if you perhaps wait until Monday when that Mercury-Mars conjunction is exact, you might perhaps have missed your moment. So if something needs to be said, Aquarius, then it's important that you say it, and that you don't wait longer than you have to. And I know that one concern you might have is that you might come over as being too harsh or rather brusque and unfeeling. I don't think you need to have this concern. If you make an effort to get on with people, to deal with people at their level, you can be very effective. You'll know how to behave in company, even though you probably don't think you do necessarily have requisite social skills, but I think you do. Pisces. Right now, Pisces, the moon is in Virgo. It's conjunct with South Node. And that means it's kind of opposition Saturn conjunct the North Node. So this nodal axis is sort of linked with a Moon-Saturn opposition. Now, that Moon-Saturn opposition is not going to be exact today. It's going to be exact over the weekend. But I think you're starting to feel it. And so this Moon-Saturn node interplay could say a lot about other people and how you relate to them, and even, where the balance of power lies. And you might be tempted to think that other people are holding the cards, that it's a time to just let others take the initiative, and you can respond how you think fit. I don't think that's the right approach. Saturn is in the North Node. It's conjunct the North Node. The North Node is the way forward, and this is something I've been telling you quite a lot, Pisces. It is all about you, and Saturn is in mutual reception to Venus by exaltation. So the reality is, Pisces, that you are the one holding the cards. It's not the other party. So don't feel that you have to be too obliging. You don't. And if there's something you want to do, then I think you should go and do it, provided you don't take things too far. I mean, I say that because there is a square between the Sun and Jupiter. So, obviously Jupiter is your ruler, and the Sun is making a square. So there may be something that you're exaggerating. So the question is, what is it that you could be exaggerating? It might be that you are over dramatic. You regard something as being, terribly important when it's not important at all. I mean, that's one approach. Additionally, the Sun is opposition Chiron, and Jupiter is square the Sun-Chiron opposition. So how's this Sun-Chiron opposition going to be working for you? Well, the Sun and Chiron, it's making this opposition across the finance axis of your chart. So there could be a financial element to this Sun-Chiron opposition. And so Sun-Chiron opposition, you might feel a financial wound. That could be an approach, or could be an interpretation, feeling that things are not great financially and perhaps feeling sorry for yourself. Alternatively, with the Sun-Chiron opposition, you might feel that you just have to do something, perhaps of a financial nature, that might be rather unusual. But it's important you're not too hasty with the Sun-Chiron opposition. It's nice to be original, it's nice to be unique, but you've got to keep things real. And Jupiter is on the T, and that, in other words, Jupiter is making squares to both Sun and Chiron. And so how this might work out might be, for example, that you should be thinking about yourself. What is you? And what you are, it's nothing to do with money. You kind of need to move beyond money. You need to think about what you can do. And remember that Jupiter is in a great position still. Okay, it will go retrograde quite soon, but it's still, it's obviously in its exaltation. It'll be in Cancer until next summer. And so by having faith in yourself, having a faith in your abilities, even perhaps the marketability of your abilities, depending on your situation, you can perhaps go beyond some of your worries and some of your obsessions, feeling you're hard done by, feeling there's some wound, or feeling someone owes you money, or it's just feeling bad. I mean, it could in certain situations be about jealousy. Oh, someone else has got more money than me. But what other people don't have is your abilities and your talents, which, with Jupiter in Cancer, really are prominent at the moment. And if you make the most of everything you've got, I don't see how you can go too far wrong. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 19, which is approach. Approach is a very sociable hexagram. It's about getting closer to other people. Perhaps it's down to us to take the initiative. And this hexagram does allow us to be sociable and to get away with being sociable. And it's the right thing to do. I mean, we might, for example, have had doubts about whether or not it was the right approach. Yes, right. But it's certainly the right approach. And we shouldn't underestimate our own power and influence. And maybe this is what it's about. There is a connection between hexagram 19 and leadership. Greg Winkup, in his translation of I Ching, he titles it not approach but leadership. Now, this might be leadership under someone else's authority, but it's still leadership. And the question is, how do we show leadership? And the way we show leadership, with the second line moving, is through just influence. We act as a role model. We show everyone else how it's done, and we're not looking for advancement. We're not looking for praise. We're just being ourselves, and because of that, we get respect, and we find that there's a great deal that we can achieve, and we do get the support we deserve. And also with approach, this can be just a general relationship hexagram. So if there's anyone you're trying to get close to, then there's a good chance of being successful. Now, because the second line moves, we move to a second hexagram. We move to a second hexagram, and we move to hexagram number 24, which is return. Now, return, it can mean going back. So we go as far as we can, and we realize that at a certain stage, well, we can't go any further, and then we return to where we started from. And so this might be how the two hexagrams of approach and return work out. So approach might be moving forward. We are advancing. We're perhaps meeting new people. We are being influential, and we make a good impression. And the reason we make a good impression is because we're not trying too hard, and we just have a natural influence, and we take things as far as we can, and we are successful, but at a certain stage we realize we've done the job. There's no point in taking things too far. We don't want to, for example, overstay our welcome, and then we just naturally return. And it's not a retreat. It's just very organic. And so perhaps there is just a natural to and fro to the day, particularly on a social level. We advance up to a point. We make an impression. People like us. We increase our influence, and then we just naturally return to where we started from. And that is probably the way to approach today. And now, finally, I want to look at the square between the Sun and Jupiter. So this square could be quite significant. I mean, there isn't a huge amount going on astrologically at the moment, so that might mean the Sun square Jupiter is becoming especially important right now. So here is here's a chart for the Sun square Jupiter. It's there. So the Sun squares Jupiter today, Friday, at 6:43 a.m. London time. So that means that if you're in California, Hawaii, Alaska, the Sun square Jupiter will in fact happen sort of late on Thursday. So the Sun square Jupiter, when we think about Sun square Jupiter, we might think about excessiveness. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind. We've got the Sun in Libra and exactly square Jupiter. We want to take things further. We're not entirely happy with the way things are, so we want to take things to the next stage. And that can sometimes be a problem. We don't want to be excessive. We don't want to spend too much money. We don't want to be overly emotional. And that might be a challenge there, because you've got Sun in Libra, Sun in an air sign, squaring Jupiter in Cancer, Jupiter in a water sign. So perhaps with Sun in Libra, wants to be reasonable, wants to be sociable, but not too sociable, wants to keep some sort of healthy distance. We don't want things to get too emotional, but Jupiter is encouraging something else, something to go further. And perhaps the Jupiter in Cancer is creating a degree of emotionality which may not always be welcome. So one way of looking at Sun square Jupiter would be to consider it in terms of emotional excess. I mean, I don't think we're talking about anything too scary with this, but I just think that is certainly a possibility, with this aspect. And when you're talking about Sun square Jupiter, Jupiter is a planet of release. Something can suddenly come to an end with Jupiter, and a release can be the right thing. So perhaps with Sun square Jupiter, it can represent a crisis or an increasingly tense situation which suddenly reaches a point. It can't go any further. Something has to happen, and there is a release. And so that's certainly a way of looking at it. And additionally, with the Sun square Jupiter, you have to think about what kind of midpoints it's on. So as far as the midpoints are concerned, well, if we look at the 90-degree dial of the Sun square Jupiter, here it is. And so Sun square Jupiter, because it's a 90-degree dial, that means that the Sun and Jupiter are sort of put together. They may make a conjunction. I mean, they're a conjunction on the 90-degree dial, and it's always a good idea to look at what midpoints it's on. So this Sun Jupiter square is on the Mars Neptune midpoint. Now that Mars Neptune midpoint can be problematic. It's also on the Pluto Hades midpoint. And so Mars Neptune can be about misdirected energy. It can be, for example, well, I like to use the word sleaze with Mars Neptune, just being attracted to things that are perhaps on the dark side, or things that may seem attractive, they seem glamorous, they seem appealing, they seem exciting, but should we be going down that road? Possibly not. And when you throw in the fact that Sun and Jupiter are on the Pluto Hades midpoint. I mean, the Pluto Hades is quite dark. I mean, Pluto and Hades, well, it's connected with the underworld, and so the Sun Jupiter square, because of these midpoints, may encourage certain people to be doing things which, strictly speaking, may not be advisable. It could be quite dangerous, and where there's glitz and glamour, there is the possibility of making some serious mistakes. So I don't know what you're doing today, what you're doing with your life. But I'm sure there aren't these kind of temptations. But maybe we're talking not just about you, but we're talking about other people. We're talking about the world in general, and so there is there's just a temptation there, and so be careful with Sun square Jupiter, because with Sun square Jupiter, there's just always that possibility of taking something just too far. Now I want to just quickly look at a few people and situations who have not situations. No, I'm just going to look at some people. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at some people who have Sun square Jupiter, just in their horoscopes. Some of them are dead, and I finally want to look at a couple of people who I think might actually be influenced by this particular Sun square Jupiter. So a chart I looked at quite recently that I think really does illustrate Sun square Jupiter quite well is the former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. And so Antonin Scalia had a Sun Jupiter square in his chart. So he had Sun in Pisces square Jupiter in Sagittarius. And sort of Antonin Scalia was, I would have said, quite an ideological Supreme Court justice. He was on the right. He, I think, played a role in giving the Republicans the 2000 election. It was a Supreme Court decision, which basically they didn't want to intervene with what was going on in Florida, and so he's a federalist. He has a particular view of the law, and again we're talking about Jupiter here. Jupiter in Sagittarius. Here is a man with Jupiter in Sagittarius. A good position for Jupiter in its own sign. Jupiter is a planet of the law. It's a planet of morality. So it's well placed. So you can see why he was a successful lawyer and a successful judge with Jupiter in Sagittarius. But then Sun square Jupiter, Sun in Pisces, Sun in Pisces, it's a water sign. He might try his hardest to give the impression of being objective, but he wasn't really objective. There was an emotional link there, Sun square Jupiter, and his part of his excessiveness was maybe in his ideology and him being an ideological judge. But Sun square Jupiter can work in a more obvious way. And in Antonin Scalia's case, if you look at pictures of him, he was clearly overweight. And so Sun square Jupiter could be about enjoying the good things in life and overdoing it, and maybe that had played some role in his death. I mean, he died relatively early. I mean, he wasn't that young when he died, but maybe he would have lived a few years longer if he had been a bit more careful about his diet and his lifestyle. And, if you've got Sun square Jupiter, additionally, you may push things to the limit. So, Brazilian racing car driver Ayrton Senna, who died in the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, he had Sun in Aries. He was born on March 21st, so he had Sun on the Aries point, square Jupiter. So you can see if you've got Sun in Aries, you're going to be attracted to speed. I mean, you could be attracted to speed. There are many ways in which the Sun in Aries can manifest, but that's certainly one manifestation. And Sun square Jupiter in Capricorn, you want to take it as far as you can. Of course, Jupiter in Capricorn probably enjoys the wealth which comes with being a Formula One racing car driver. And so he was perhaps looking after his own financial interests with Jupiter in Capricorn. But, Sun square Jupiter, can be about taking things as far as you can, and perhaps in the end going too far, and that perhaps contributed to his death in 1994. And a couple of people in the news right now, Chuck Schumer, he is the Senate minority leader. He has Sun in Sagittarius, square Jupiter. It's a dissociate square, but the square is still pretty close. And so he's got Sun conjunct Venus. So he's got Venus square Jupiter, and his Sun in Jupiter, I don't know whether this has any influence on talk about the government shutdown, wanting to take things as far as possible, perhaps taking things to the brink. But maybe you know more about Chuck Schumer than I do. And another politician who has Sun square Jupiter is the current French Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu. Again, I don't know much about him, except he is Prime Minister. He's a good friend of Emmanuel Macron. So he has the Sun in Gemini, square Jupiter. So I don't think Sun square Jupiter says anything necessarily about him wanting to be involved in politics. So Jupiter in Pisces, if you've got Jupiter in Pisces, you might well have ideas about the way countries should be run. You know, Jupiter is a very moral planet, so if it's in its own sign, square Jupiter, he might just have a view about politics, but I don't really know too much about him. And then if you've been following cryptocurrency, Michael Saylor of Strategy Frame, it used to be called MicroStrategy, he has the Sun in Aquarius square Jupiter. So Sun in Aquarius here is someone who is quite independent-minded. He has a particular view. He has made a decision that all of his company's excess money will be put into Bitcoin. But Sun square Jupiter, maybe he's going to take things too far. Now his company MicroStrategy, it was in the dot-com bubble. It had a real boom, and it completely crashed. In 2000, the share price completely crashed, and maybe that says something about him and how he was running a company. Sun square Jupiter, there's a certain excess, taking things too far, and this is what he's done with MicroStrategy. He's certainly taken things very far. I don't know about too far, but his company has been sort of piling on the Bitcoin and using complex financial mechanisms to get as much Bitcoin as possible, giving out shares. I mean, it's really complicated. And maybe that's Sun square Jupiter, but he is very sure that he's in the right. Sun in Aquarius, square Jupiter in Taurus, in a fixed sign. And so who might be impacted by this square between the Sun and Jupiter? So one person who could be influenced by it is Zoran Mamdani. He is a candidate for the mayor in New York. And so we got an election in a few weeks' time. I haven't been following the polls. I think he's expected to win at the moment. And he has his Sun at 24 degrees Libra. So Zoran Mamdani has his birthday on Saturday. And this Sun Jupiter square is going to have an impact on him. I'm not going to say anything more about Zoran Mamdani because perhaps in my next video, for the weekend, I'll be looking at his chart in some detail. But with Jupiter exactly square his Sun, with Chiron square his Sun, maybe something is about to happen. Something could happen regarding his campaign. I think it's really quite close. So maybe he's someone who we should be watching. And then there is the British royal family. Camilla, Prince King Charles's wife, has her Sun at 23 degrees Cancer. So in a female chart, it's quite possible that the Sun represents her husband, the man in her life, and so she has got Jupiter conjunct her Sun, and she's also got Sun square her Sun. So I don't know what kind of day she's going to have. Now, you would think that Jupiter conjunct her Sun would be a good thing, that something good will happen. But, Jupiter can be quite treacherous. It may not be good. It may be that something comes to light that she wasn't expecting, or maybe it could be a shock. But it could be good news. So I think that we're unlikely to know what's happening. Okay, it could be something about Charles and something quite public about Charles. I mean, that is a possibility, but perhaps we're just never going to know. And finally, there is Meghan. Now, there's an absolute reason why we need to talk about Meghan, and that is because Meghan has her ascendant at 24 degrees 17 Cancer. So Jupiter is crossing her ascendant. And, in astrology, Jupiter crossing the ascendant is often seen as being something good. She's had Jupiter transiting her 12th house for some time. And you could argue that Jupiter crossing her ascendant can be a new beginning for her. And Jupiter actually goes stationary retrograde. Stationary retrograde at around 25 Cancer. So then it goes back over her ascendant. So if I was Meghan's astrologer, I'd be quite optimistic about it. I would tell her that this is a time where things could potentially start to work for her. I mean, I looked at her Vedic chart quite recently. I think it was yesterday I looked at it, and Jupiter, she's got Cancer rising in her Vedic chart as well as her Western chart, and Jupiter is going into sidereal Cancer. It works quite well from an Ashtaka Varga point of view if you do the point system for Jupiter's transits of each house. So maybe Jupiter could be a new beginning, and you can see Jupiter crossing her ascendant already. She's been desperate to get attention. Went to Paris, and she went to New York, and she's always doing something. And of course, the Paris trip was quite controversial because Harry had always said he was never going to visit Paris because that's where his mother died. And so there's a huge amount of stories going on about Meghan, because there was a sort of a drought. People lost interest in her for a long time, but now she's in the spotlight again, and maybe this is connected with Jupiter crossing her ascendant. And the question is, what is she going to do? Is it a guaranteed thing that she's going to start having better luck? I don't think it's guaranteed at all. But when you've got Jupiter crossing your ascendant, if you make the effort, if you make the effort in the right direction, maybe she can turn things around. I mean, still, it looks pretty grim for her at the moment. She is as unpopular as ever, as far as I can see. But still, maybe there's something she can salvage from it with Jupiter crossing her ascendant. And as far as today is concerned, the Sun is square her ascendant at the same time as Jupiter is on her ascendant. So this Sun square Jupiter has a direct impact on her. And I think that maybe something will happen. Perhaps we'll start to see whether or not this Sun square Jupiter is going to be good news or bad news. I mean, I would have said that Jupiter crossing her ascendant is good news. Sun square her ascendant could be sort of more problematic, but we don't know quite what she's planning and how it's going to. We might not know how it's going to affect her, but I do think for Meghan, this Sun square Jupiter, could be quite an important event. So that's all I've got to say on Sun square Jupiter. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.